It's sad, but I've talked to many producers who have actually encouraged their children not to come back to the ranch
Yeah.
for that very reason. It's been it's hard work, but that's not what dissuades them. It's the lack of profitability, the inability to raise a family.
I'm Carson Jorgensen. And this is the Carson Jorgensen Podcast. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us again today. Today I have with me Bill Bullard. He's the CEO of RCAF USA. They are the largest advocates for the independent cattle and sheep producers across this country. Bill has done amazing work advocating for ranchers, talking trade policy, talking all those things that affect the independent cattle producers and sheep producers across the country. He is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to these types of things and what's affecting the cattle industry in the United States and why the decline and the way things are in the industry today. So I hope you enjoy this one like I did, and stick around. So thanks for joining me. Hey, before we get going here, as always, I'd like to have you introduce yourself to folks that may not know you, as well as kind of tell us how you got started in all this. How did you become such an advocate for ranchers across the country, and where did this all begin?
Well, I'm Bill Bullard, and I'm the CEO of RCAF USA, and we're the largest producer-only cattle association in the United States, but we also represent sheep producers. And I've been in this position now for 24 years. And I'm a former rancher from Northwest South Dakota, had a cow-calf operation. And after leaving the ranch, went back to college and then spent some time with the South Dakota Public Utilities Commission, where I got government experience. And then was approached to be the CEO of RCAF USA soon after that. And so kind of made the full circle where I was a cow-calf producer. Now I represent a lot of cow-calf producers and sheep producers. So that's how I ended up here.
Oh, and we're glad to have you, and you've done such great work. And I mean, agriculture seems to be a pretty hot topic right now, and you see it a lot. You were on Fox News here quite a few times in the last couple of months talking about the current state of the beef industry and what's going on in cattle and sheep. You and I just visited Washington and spoke with some folks at the White House and at the CPA conference. So what is the current state? I mean, people, you see both sides of it. You see, oh, things are good, the prices are great, everything's good. But what do we see under the surface that people really aren't talking about?
Well, what we're not talking about is that both the cattle and the sheep industries are in a crisis situation right now and have been for decades. So we've lost over half of all the producers that used to be in business just a little over a generation ago, back in 1980. And we've lost about over 9 million mother cows from our U.S. cattle herd. And we've lost 86,000 independent feedlots out of our industry. And in order to maintain a competitive industry, you need participants and you need the factory, in our case, mother cows or the ewes in your sheep industry. And you need intermediary marketing outlets and you need packers. And, going back again to over a generation ago, we had over 1,400 federally inspected packing plants across the United States. And our industry has been shrinking at an alarming rate. And so as the industry has shrank, we've also encountered drought that has not caused our herd size to be the lowest level in 70 years, but it accelerated the ongoing decline of our herd size. So it has really brought about a very acute situation. And so now, with cattle prices at the highest nominal levels in history, resulting from a shrunken herd in our U.S. cattle herd, we're at a turning point. So we could either continue to do what we've been doing, and that is we would supplement our domestic production with imported product, thereby satisfying domestic beef demand, and our industry will continue to shrink. And from our perspective, what we need to do is we need to make a significant change to the industry. We need to provide our industry the opportunity to rebuild, to expand, and to attract new entrants, which we've not been successful for many years. And the only way we're going to do that is to protect our industry from this excessive volume of cheap imports that are direct substitutes for our domestic producers. And so, obviously, Carson, that's why you and I were talking to the White House, because we have a president now who is focused on using tariffs for the purpose of strengthening our domestic supply chains. And while I've just been talking about the cattle industry, we look at your sheep industry, and it is the canary in the coal mine. We realize that the sheep industry is very similar in biological characteristics. They're both ruminant animals, and their marketing structure is very similar. And so in the sheep industry, we've seen this situation grow to a serious level. In fact, we're now at a point where about 73 to 76% of all the lamb consumed in America is foreign lamb. And how did that happen? The same thing that's going on in the cattle industry, but it happened quicker in the sheep industry. The sheep industry is a smaller industry, and as a result, it was more adversely affected by the failed trade policies that we have been pursuing for decades.
Yeah.
And the entire goal of the conventional beef industry and even the sheep industry is to expand export access to abroad for the purpose of increasing demand for our respective products, beef or lamb. And the belief being that once you increase demand for the products, then the domestic producers would roll in prosperity. But what has happened is, as we've opened up our markets in order to gain export access, the imports have far outpaced our exports and leaving us awash in these cheaper imports that is reducing opportunities for producers. So we go back to the fact that we have the highest nominal prices in history and a very small herd. What we need to do now is more than ever is we need to protect our industry so that the price point that the producers are now realizing can be sustained so that they can begin that expansion process. And once we reach the ability to be self-reliant in beef production in the United States and have more competition again after we address the high concentration in our industry, the cattle industry, for example, we've got 4 packers controlling 80% of the fed cattle market. Once we address that, competitive forces will be reignited in our industry. And obviously, that's how consumers can be treated fairly. They need competition as much as cattle producers and sheep producers need competition. And it is, in fact, competition that is going to ensure that consumers have an abundant supply of affordable food and will not be exploited by dominant participants in the marketplace or by those who have market access, or excuse me, those who have sources outside the United States with which to depress the prices to pay to U.S. cattle producers. We've gone through a long, long period where producers on one end of the food supply chain and consumers on the other have both been exploited by the dominant market participants.
Absolutely, and I think that my argument to the import export deal, yeah, I mean, it started as we're trying to open up export markets, but my argument to that has always been, show me anywhere we can export where the dollar's worth more. Because every time we go to export, we're already losing money because the American dollar is so high. And that is where, the technicalities of trade become really something to pay attention to, because that's where we're losing so much ground on this import game is through the exchange rate. And not to step back too far, but there's a lot of people that don't understand. They hear, the big packers or the feeders or all of these things. Do you want to take a minute and explain how the system works, how cows get from point A to your dinner plate?
Well, sure. So the most populated segment of our industry are the cow-calf producers. Those are the ones that maintain a mother cow herd year-round, and they breed those cows and have a calf typically in the spring. And then they will keep the calf on the mother cow for 4 to 6 months, after which the animal is weaned And because of the long biological cycle, it's not ready to go to the feedlot yet. It
Yeah.
has to continue to grow. And we call that segment of our industry our backgrounding and stocker segment. So these calves that leave the mother cow, let's say 500 pounds, will be put back on grass or in a feedlot and fed not a fattening diet, but a growing diet until they reach the weight of about 800 pounds approximately. And then they'll go into this final segment of the live cattle supply chain, and that will be in the feedlot where they're fed a high concentrated diet, typically for 120 to 160 days. And when they're weighing approximately 1,300 pounds, they will be delivered directly to the packer gate and slaughtered and fabricated into consumable meat products. That whole process lasts approximately 15 to 18 months typically in the cattle industry. And the sheep industry is very similar, but you don't have the backgrounding segment as we do in the cattle industry. So the ewe will lamb, and oftentimes have twins, which makes the industry very preferred by those who are starting out in ranching. Young individuals who want to get into ranching, sheep were always a good
Yeah.
choice. But the price point on sheep is not being shared as the price point in cattle at this time.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, even though the sheep industry has been shrinking and their herd size is so terribly small, smallest in history, the fact is that the price for lambs is still inadequate to cover the production costs for many producers, and so there's no opportunity to grow there. And for that industry, we need stronger tariffs. We need more tariff rate quotas. We need to limit the volume of imports coming in, and we need to rebuild our domestic industry.
Yeah, and there is so too in that because again, you and I understand this, but there are many people who listen who want to understand who owns what. So give everybody a background because I mean, you start at the cow calf guys; those are usually independent ranchers, and then
That's
we
it.
go on to the feeders, and then or onto the backgrounders, and then onto the feeders, and then onto the packers. Kind of give everybody a rundown of who owns what the percentages kind of look like across that board and where the consolidation actually begins.
So in the cattle industry, I told you we've lost over half the producers just over a generation. So we had 1.3 million producers in 1980. We're down to 622,000. So we've lost 650,000 of our cattle producers. Most of those are our cow calf producers. That's who's been dropping like flies in the industry. And I don't have a breakdown between those who are exclusively cow calf producer because many cow calf producers are also backgrounders and stockers. They'll keep yearlings
Sure.
back. But so I don't have a breakdown between those two groups, but there's about 622,000 independent family scale farmers and ranchers that raise the mother cows and that grow the animal until they're ready for the feedlot. And when they move into the feedlot, we had about 113,000 feedlots in the United States scattered all across America back a generation ago, back in 1980. And now we're down to about 25,000. We've literally wiped out 77% of all the feedlots. So many of these feedlots are what we call farmer feeders. They're family scale operations that have a feedlot capacity of less than 1,000 head. They're environmentally friendly. You don't have the waste problems that you do in some of the highly concentrated sectors. And it is the family scale feeding operations that have fallen by the wayside at an alarming rate. Those are the ones we're losing. So then you've got medium sized feedlots that would have a capacity of over 1,000 head. And then we move all the way up to what we consider to be the mega feedlots, those with a capacity of about 50,000 head. So they have all concentrated down in the area of the United States called the Beef Belt, down in the Kansas, the Nebraska, Oklahoma, Texas region. And we now we've got 80 of these mega feedlots. And these are corporate structures. These aren't the family scale operations. But they feed about 35% of all the fed cattle in America. So they have tremendous control, market power. as a result of their so few of them, centralization, and just dominance over the marketplace. And then of course from those feedlots, both large and small alike, the cattle are moved to the meat packers, where again we have four of them controlling about 80% of that fed cattle market. So the industry has, I view it to be skeletonized. We've centralized and we've reduced the participants in the industry. We're threatening our competitive infrastructure, and consumers found this out firsthand in the mid 2020, right after the COVID outbreak, because they went to the grocery stores and for the first time in history, they could not buy the protein they needed for their family. And that's because our system was incapable of withstanding a shock. A shock, like in that case, it was a human disease problem, but it is equally incapable of withstanding a weather related shock or an animal disease type shock. And we're talking the food industry. I mean, it is vitally important that we have a consistent supply, an abundant supply of food that is immune from these kinds of shortages. And the only way you're going to have that is if we return to the type of an industry that we once had, and that's an industry that's widely disaggregated, that consists of millions of independent producers, and you have local and regional packing plants and local and regional feedlots. And if there's a problem in any one area of the United States, the other areas can rebound and pick up the slack.
Yeah,
We need
and
independence.
that really led to my next question. You know, we saw this massive reduction in feedlots. We've seen this massive reduction in owner operators. Why is that important, and why should the general public care?
Well, and it's because of food security. And of course, as we know, and it's been talked about quite often now, food security is national security. But you cannot have food security if you keep eliminating all your farmers and ranchers. And so,
Yeah,
why this matters to consumers is because when you have a disaggregated system consisting of producers all scattered all across the United States, and you have the supply chain likewise scattered all across the United States, rather than be centralized in a five-state region like we have today, then they can withstand economic shocks, climatic shocks, and disease-related shocks, and we will for perpetuity have an abundant and wholesome supply of food for our consumers. And very importantly, when you break up this high level of concentration and centralization that we have today, you will reignite competition. And again, it is competitive forces in the marketplace that will ensure that producers on one end of the supply chain and consumers on the other are treated fairly and not exploited by the situation that we're faced with today.
yeah, absolutely. And when did this begin? I mean, and we talk a lot about market concentration and consolidation. When did you notice that these things were really starting to ramp up and this consolidation really began to pick up?
So I use 1980 as the benchmark because that's the beginning of what even the U.S. Department of Agriculture referred to as merger mania. That's when the United States decided it was no longer going to aggressively enforce our antitrust laws, or for our cattle and sheep industries, the Packers and Stockyards Act. They were just going to
Yeah.
let the market do as it will, and it would be self correcting. But what happened was the largest began to, through mergers and acquisitions, reduce the number of processing plants in the United States. And as a result, we saw what soon followed was a reduction in the number of cattle, the number of sheep, the number of producers, and the number of feedlots. And so this all began back at about 1980. And it started with concentration through that merger medium. But then soon after that, we embarked upon a failed ideology, and that was free trade, globalization. That occurred, manifested itself back in the mid 1990s. The Uruguay round of 1994, the GATT agreement, for example. And then we purposely tried to provide more access to the United States market for foreign meat. And we expected that those countries who had a comparative advantage, those countries, for example, down in South America that have grass year round, they would expect it to have a comparative advantage, and then our consumers would benefit by lower cost beef coming from that country. Problem was, is in order for us to attract imports from developing countries and developed countries alike, we soon found that those countries could not meet our high health and safety standards. And so, one of the first things the U.S. Department of Agriculture did back in the mid 90s was it began to relax our import restrictions for the sole purpose of facilitating more imports in the United States. So, we went through a series of steps. Number one, we no longer required foreign countries to have food safety systems that were at least equal to the United States. That used to be the standard. Now it's
Yeah.
a standard of close enough. It just needs to be equivalent. So we relaxed our standard of food safety to facilitate more imports. And then we recognized that it wasn't fair for U.S. meat inspectors to physically go down to these foreign countries and visit their packing plants to ensure that they were meeting even minimal sanitary conditions. We relaxed that requirement. We used to require meat inspectors to go down to foreign meat packing plants and inspect them once each month. Now there's only periodic inspections because that was just too burdensome for
Yep.
these countries that wanted to access the United States. And then we realized that much of the world finds itself with animal disease problems that are the pernicious diseases. They're diseases that can actually literally destroy an industry, like foot and mouth disease, for example. And so we
I mean,
decided,
look
well,
at New World Screwworm right now. I
and New
mean, the
World
border's
Screwworm,
closed right now because
back
of
to the
New World
U.S.
Screwworm.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And so, in their infinite wisdom, our U.S. Department of Agriculture decided no longer would we prevent imports from countries that had serious foreign animal diseases and pests. Instead, we would carve out a region in an infected country and simply declare that in this region the disease persists, but in the region across the river, we're good and we will continue to import. We call
Yeah, and
that
who's policing
regionalization.
it? Yeah, who's policing it?
All a part of globalization. Well, we rely upon the foreign governments, of course. And as we
Yeah.
know, some of these South American developing countries do not have a regime that we could have any confidence in. And so, in order to perpetuate this, of course, the industry fights against issues like mandatory country of origin labeling. They don't want
Yep.
consumers to know that the beef they're purchasing at the grocery store could be coming from Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Honduras, Brazil, Argentina, New Zealand, Australia, um,
Namibia.
Namibia, Africa. Uh, so they have prevented Congress and the administration from having a country of origin labeling regime that would provide consumers with factual information as to where their beef and the lamb that they're purchasing was actually consumed. Well, just to clarify, in your lamb industry, you
Sure.
do have country of origin labeling, but not in beef.
Not in
And
beef.
so this enables the multinational, the global importers, to source beef from any country where they can get it the cheapest, bring it into the U.S. market, and sell it in the U.S. market as if it were produced by U.S. farmers and ranchers under the highest health and safety standards in the world. And the reason that they've been so successful in doing that is because all meat products entering the U.S. market must bear a safety label, United States inspection label. And so all products,
Yep.
foreign and domestic alike, will have the same label, and consumers expect that to denote that the product is a domestic product when in fact it isn't. And of course, you're aware it's even worse than that.
Yeah.
Since 2015, the meat packers have been allowed by law to import a steak from Uruguay, for example, And once that steak crosses U.S. Customs and Border Protection, it will bear a product of USA, or excuse me, a product of Uruguay label on the product. And the multinational meat packers would bring it into one of their domestic plants, take it out of the Uruguayan package, place it in a new package, and affix a product of the USA label on that meat product that is exclusively of foreign origin. You can't get more deceptive than that. But
No.
that's a demonstration or an example of just how politically powerful the global meat packers are here in the United States, and how they've essentially established and designed a regulatory regime, a legal regime, and a policy regime that allows them to exploit our domestic industry.
No, it's the golden rule. He who has the gold makes the rules. And these guys, they have a very powerful lobby. They have the ability to do these things and to really lean on Congress. But this should be a no-brainer for folks. I don't know anybody who will say, I don't really care if my beef comes from Africa or the United States. Because guess what? You're paying the same for all of it. You
Yep.
are paying the same for all of it, and you don't know where it's coming from. It may have been sitting on a boat for the last 32 days. I mean, we run into that with lamb all the time. They're like, I've tried lamb. It's not that great. I'm like, well, was it from New Zealand or Australia? You're like, yeah. I'm like, well, probably because it sat on the boat for 32 days at 33 degrees. And that's doing existential damage to our markets, I truly believe. And I don't even know if we can quantify that. But this leads to the bigger picture that I think many people are starting to open their eyes to, and that's the globalist agenda in all of this. And there are many tools used in the globalist agenda. One of them to me is free trade. People say, we need free trade. I say, well, that'd be great. I'd like to try it sometime because I have yet to see free trade. The other thing is, you mentioned it earlier, is RFID, mandatory RFID tags. But now we're talking Bill Gates' new super vaccine that helps cows not fart as much, and the rations that they're now making people feed their cattle over in Europe for a minimum of 80 days that makes them not produce methane. Guys, this is doing damage to these animals. This is doing damage to these animals, but these are the tools that the globalists are using. And how do you feel? I mean, where do you see us going? I mean, Europe's way ahead of us when it comes to agricultural laws, but the US is kind of taking off and following their lead. And anybody over in the UK or in Europe will tell you, run the other direction as fast as you can.
Right, right. And the electronic identification ear tags are a good example of that, because they did that in Australia, they did it in Canada, and they did it for purposes of trying to increase their ability to access more foreign markets. And so the United States dutifully tried to comply, but our industry, which happens to consist of some of the most fiercely independent
Right?
people
Good luck.
in our society, and they resisted for decades. The USDA has been trying to force this mandate on producers since the mid 2000s, and all at the behest of the globalists who want to be able to tell their customers in South Korea and Japan and elsewhere that all the meat can be tracked all the way back to the individual farmer. Uh, but importantly, they don't have to pay the individual farmer for that additional value added that's called the information about the product.
Right.
And so this has all been geared towards maximizing the profits of the shareholders of the global companies. They've been highly successful at it. And what we need to do is get back down to basics. So we need to be producing the Maha report that just came out, talking about the need to feed our children whole foods as opposed to ultra processed foods. Well, our two industries produce whole foods,
Right.
and we can meet the objective of reducing the chemical content, the additives, in our meat products. So we need to get back to basics. We need to look at what's good for consumers, what's good for the industry, and we need to respect the freedoms and liberties that all citizens have. And when you have a government that's going to mandate certain things like forcing cattle producers to affix a costly electronic identification ear tag, which chip in those tags, by the way, we presume comes from China.
Yeah.
Um, you know,
You
this
don't
is
say.
this is the wrong direction for the United States. However, we do have a highly concentrated industry, and producers, independent producers, need to be protected from the market abuse that emanates uh, inherently from these highly concentrated globalists. And in order to do that, we need a renewed emphasis on enforcing our Packers and Stockyards Act, the Sherman Act, the Clayton Act. And we've tried to address this concentration of these global packers for decades, and it fell on deaf ears by the government. So we initiated private action 6 years ago. We filed a national antitrust class action lawsuit against the big four packers 6 years ago, alleging that they have artificially depressed cattle prices paid to producers while simultaneously inflating beef prices that consumers pay at the grocery store. So that's the heart of our lawsuit. It's been going on for 6 years. Very recently, we reached a proposed settlement with JBS, one of the four largest packers, in the amount of $83.5 million. So we're now in the process of encouraging cattle feeders who sold cattle to any one of the big four packers to file a claim against that settlement amount of $83.5 million. And we also know that the U.S. Department of Justice and the U.S. Department of Agriculture have both initiated investigations into the conduct of the dominant meat packers within the cattle market. And that investigation has been going on since the mid 2020s. We haven't heard the outcome of that yet, but there's suddenly been a shift, a very positive shift, a reemphasis on the need to competition is not going to occur properly if you have dominant participants that can manipulate the market. So, in order to protect competition, we need to enforce the antitrust laws that were passed in 1890, the Sherman Act, and around 1912 to 14, the Clayton Act. These were laws intended to protect consumers and producers against the abusive conduct of huge monopolistic or uh, oligopolistic type
Yeah.
industries. So, uh,
No, absolutely. And that brings me to another point, and this ties, I mean, really good into the next segue, which is why is ranching important? I mean, what other benefits? I mean, yeah, we talk about the health benefits. I had Dr. Sean Baker on, and we talked thoroughly about the benefits of red meat and why it's so important in our diet, and why why it does what it does for our bodies and what it can do. But as far as the environment goes and as far as our country goes, what other benefits are there to ranching? Why is it so important that we raise it here on our own shores?
well, one thing we know is that when you have independently owned family scale operations that are passed from generation to generation, they are the best stewards of our environment, the land, the air, and the water,
Yep.
because they are preserving that for their children and grandchildren and so forth. And so it's a direct environmental benefit. And much of the western part of the United States, we have a lot of federally managed lands. And the goal used to be to try to populate those lands with people. And in the West, the way that you would bring people into that area is to provide them an opportunity to raise livestock. And so we had a long history of running livestock, sheep and cattle both, on federally managed lands. But in about the latter 70s, there was a complete change in public policy. And suddenly it was one, well, let's eliminate all those people and those pesky livestock from federally managed lands. And since that time, we've had the intensity and severity of forest fires has been aggravated because no longer do we have livestock that are grazing the underbrush and the grasses that are the fuel for these devastating fires. And so it's a balance that we achieve when you have ranchers that are independently owned, that are making decisions, about how to preserve the environment, how to maintain their pasture land, so that it will continue to produce, good grass for perpetuity for their children and grandchildren. And you lose that when you move to the more industrialized and corporate type agriculture, which is what's happened in the poultry industry, for example. Um, and we saw the devastation that occurred back in the COVID period.
Yeah.
Their system broke down too, just like our system bringing beef to the grocery store broke down. Their system broke down, and they couldn't get rid of their chickens, so they had to euthanize millions of chickens. And I don't know the number of hogs that were euthanized, but those are two industries that are completely vertically integrated. And two things about vertical integration: that's when the global meat packers or the dominant meat packers control the entire supply chain, from birth to plate for hogs, from egg to plate for chickens. The other important thing to know about vertical integration is it kills competition. Vertical integration is completely eliminates competition and allows the corporate entities to decide on how they're going to treat the environment, how they're going to treat their workers, how they're going to treat the farmers. And you essentially have farmers who are serfs on their own land, because while the corporations control their operations, the farmers are relegated to paying the capital costs of running an operation. So the farmers bear all the risk, and the corporations bear all benefit from the profit at the expense of the producers. And consumers are being harmed too. You lose diversity, you lose that the competitive forces. Competitive forces will occur when people are trying to achieve exceptionalism and improve the quality of a product. That's not what these big corporations are after. They're after a consistent quality product that'll fit in a package.
Yep.
And that's what's happening. You lose diversity in your genetics. In the chicken industry, for example, there's been concerns raised there. Um, and so that's why ranchers are important. That's why a diverse, disaggregated ranching system is important. And very importantly, the family farm system of agriculture, which was unique to the United States, has been the envy of the world as being the most productive and innovative system to produce an abundant and affordable supply of wholesome food. And we've lost sight of that
Yeah.
because we believe in this, the largeness of scale. Let them get big and they can produce it cheaper. Well, what's happened is they get big and they are likely producing it cheaper, but the consumer's paying the same price, if not more.
Yep, and the farmer
The
ain't getting
benefits
it. I
are
mean, look at the farm dollar. As of the last agricultural census, I believe that out of every single dollar spent in the store, the farmer's getting what, 9.5 cents now. I mean that, and it's down from about 40 cents, and that's what folks should know. It's not the farmers that are collecting the money. It's not the ranchers that are collecting the money. And oftentimes I don't see, when we talk about the climate, I don't think people see. I mean, look at the decline in numbers of cattle, look at the decline of numbers of sheep, how many multiples of thousands and millions we've lost. What are they doing? They're out there grazing. They are helping with the photosynthesis cycle. They are synthesizing carbon from the atmosphere. They've talked about it time and time again. The best way to sequester carbon from the atmosphere is to graze livestock, is to
right.
put it back in the ground through plants, through animal agriculture, through the corn belt in the Midwest. I mean, these are things that I don't think we often enough take credit for. And I think they're so vitally important. And as you said, wildfires for the last few years have been running rampant out here in the West, and they are just getting bigger in scope and they're bigger in size. And everybody blames climate change. Why don't we start putting the blame where it actually lies, with the politicians and the special interest groups who are banning grazing and logging on these historically managed ranges? And the other thing is, this thing, before people were here, sure, it used to happen. We used to have massive fires all the time, and they never put them out. The problem is now we put out these spot fires because there's structures in the way, or there's an endangered turtle or something like that. And now the forest doesn't get cleaned out. And then when it does get a good one going, the whole thing goes up, and it does existential damage for years and years to come. And it is a land management problem, not a climate change issue. And that's where so many people are missing the boat, I believe. But as far as that goes, the numbers, where is the cattle industry now as far as numbers go from its peak?
Well, we're at a historical low with about 622,000 cattle producers in our industry, and the census counts cattle producers as any farm that has at least one animal, one cow. And
Okay.
so, but if we look at the breakdown, the average herd size in the United States is only about 44 head per farm. And if you look at, well, who are the full-time cattle producers? Not those that live, in the suburbs and running a few head of cattle, but how many full-time cattle producers do we have? We have about 65,000 cattle producers that have a herd size of over 100 head. And you need actually more than that to be a economically viable
Yeah.
unit. You're going to need to run 300 to 500 head. So
Yep.
we have a very small percentage of cattle producers who are at the heart of our industry, who need to have a competitive market, who need to have uh, be protected from these imports. Otherwise, they will drop like flies as they have been. You don't lose over half of producers in just a few decades when the system is working properly. The system has been broken. The market has been fundamentally, systemically broken for decades. And the sheep industry, again, that canary in the coal mine, we're down to about 6,300 full-time sheep producers. And it's actually much less than that because we're counting a full-time sheep producer as anyone who has a flock size of over 100 head. Well, that 100 head is the equivalent of about 20 cows because
Right.
sheep are just smaller animals and will graze less. And so we're in a state of crisis. It's a crisis that's adversely affecting our national security. It makes us vulnerable to the shocks we talked about: disease, climate, and economic. And now is the time to change it. Now is the time to reform the system.
So how many mother cows are left in the system? 86 million?
In terms of mother cows, we're about 28 million. In,
28
in
total
terms of
cattle.
total cows and calves, we're up around 87 million, somewhere thereabouts.
87 million. And where was that number at the peak? Do you know?
So we were 9 million head above that in 1980. Our
Okay.
peak was at about 1975 to 1976. I cannot tell you. I think we're over 100 million head,
Yeah.
but I can't tell you the exact number without looking.
Yeah, and this is a fact that I use a statistic all the time. The sheep industry, we went from 56 million down to 5 million. I mean,
Right.
you've lost all of that, but we're starting to lose ground in the beef industry as well. And it is ramping up. It is increasing, and it is getting faster and faster. And on this last point, and I think this ties in perfect with what's going on geopolitically right now, and you and I have talked about this, but as of 2023, the United States for the first time became a net importer of food. In 2020, we ran about a $4 billion surplus in agricultural products. So we were there. Projections for 2025, we are looking at a $50 billion deficit. So we went from 4 billion above to 50 billion below in a matter of 4.5 years. We are in a bad spot right now. And I told somebody this yesterday. If in fact we get dragged into this geopolitical conflict from Russia, the United States is in trouble. Because leading up to World War II, the United States was a major producer of agricultural products. We had a strong trade surplus. And yet there were still bread lines, yet there was still rationing going on. This is an absolute national security issue, and nobody's taking it with the seriousness that it deserves because this is important and we have to see this fixed or else we cannot. I mean, it's warfighting readiness, it's national security, it's all of these things. But we have to be able to take care of ourselves first, and we have set ourselves up for failure if we get dragged into a geopolitical conflict.
Right. Right.
So that's
So
why the consumer should care.
That's empirical evidence that this ideology that we've been pursuing for decades, called globalism and free trade, is an abject failure.
Yeah.
It has made us vulnerable and susceptible to the conditions that the potential that you've described. And but I want to bring up. You said things are getting worse. So the latest census that came out in 2022 was the latest census since 2017. So a 5 year period between 2017 and 2022. Just in that period, we lost about another 107,000 independent cattle producers from our industry. That's a loss rate of over 21,000 cattle producers each year in the past 5 years. So, indeed, things have worsened, and they've worsened even with these higher nominal prices in the industry. It's because, and we're not expanding. Even though the widespread drought that had been attributed to the decline in the number of cattle recently in 2021 and 22. Even though that's over, we're not seeing the rebuilding of the industry. We used to have a cattle cycle that responded to competitive forces. One of the reasons is there's a lack of confidence that the industry can be sustained, because for 40 years it hasn't been. And if we don't change fundamentally change the direction of the industry, if we don't begin to regulate imports, we will continue to see our industry shrink. We will continue to make our food system vulnerable to geopolitical conflicts and otherwise. And ultimately, this is bad for consumers and bad for rural communities. We have hollowed out rural communities all across America. You know, it's sad, but I've talked to many producers who have actually encouraged their children not to come back to the ranch
Yeah.
for that very reason. It's been it's hard work, but that's not what dissuades them. It's the lack of profitability, the inability to raise a family as their parents and other ancestors did. So we've got to get back to basics. We need a competitive industry. We need lots of markets. We need people scattered all over the United States. We need more packing plants. But all of this has to start with a competitive marketplace, and one that is not inundated with these cheaper, undifferentiated imports that are direct substitutes for what our domestic industry is trying to produce.
No, and I think that's a perfect place to end on. And for me, when I look at it, I see this, I hate to say it, but I saw the Save the Small Farms outlook come out from the USDA the other day, and not a single mention of trade policy reform. And anybody talking to you about saving the small farms and the family ranches, it's not talking about trade policy reform, is lying to you, or they are misinformed. And I think it's high time we all hold these people accountable for it, because farmers and ranchers, like you said, they don't want subsidies. They just want a fair market to play in. They want to raise their kids. They want to grow their farm and pass it on to the next generation and the one beyond that. So, Bill, thanks for taking the time today. I know you're a busy man, but thank you again. And I'm sure we'll talk to you pretty soon.
My pleasure. Thank you, Carson.
Thanks for joining us today. If you enjoyed this episode, hit that like button. Subscribe to the podcast and make sure you turn on your notifications so you know when we release a new episode. Thanks again, and we'll see y'all soon.